say thank you for taking some time to join us, Director Moskowitz and Deputy Director Guthrie. I know you got a lot going on, and we wanted to use this platform really just to say thank you for all the tireless work you've done over the past year, responding to COVID, and then working through the hurricane season. But we also, Director Moskowitz, wanted to use the platform to give you an opportunity to talk about really the transition. Rumor has it that there might be a change in leadership down at DEM, and so we wanted to give really both of you an opportunity to talk about that and just provide some information and really some just reassurance to all the counties that are still working through the COVID-19. So I'll turn it over to you.
Uh, no, look, I appreciate that. Obviously, it's no rumor. I'm April 30th is my last day. Kevin will become the director starting May 1st. He's been the deputy here by the time I leave for almost 2.5 years, and then he predates even my arrival with being requested by the previous administration to come up and assist with Michael, and then he also had assisted with Irma for periods of time, and obviously with his experience at both Flagler and Pasco County, Kevin has more experience than I do in the disaster management industry. That's mostly because of age, though.
That's correct.
Okay, fair enough. But the division has been in great hands since Kevin has been here. The division will be in great hands when I leave. I mean, quite frankly, Kevin and I have been joined at the hip for the last 2.5 years, pre-COVID. All of those things that we did here to help, with cities and counties. When Kevin and I both came in leadership roles, many of you know this. Obviously, we found a broken public assistance program here at the state. Billions of dollars that the state was sitting on of your money, not getting that back for reimbursements for multiple storms years ago. And we changed that policy. Not just that policy, we changed multiple policies within that. We started using expedited reimbursement for Michael to get $250 million into the community as fast as possible. And all of those things that we've done in the PA space, I mean, look, we've sent down now $4.3 or $4.4 billion down to local government. So I know Kevin is going to continue, obviously, to make sure that we do our job, quite frankly, and don't add unnecessary delay to reimbursements. We know, obviously, the federal government doesn't necessarily have a fast reimbursement process. The division's job is to make sure that the money is spent correctly, that things are audited correctly, but it's not the division's job to add additional delay. And so I don't think you're going to see that. We've done some other things that I think, quite frankly, some of them were Kevin's idea, some were mine idea, but I know they come in the same vein, so they're going to continue. We've laid out money for sheriff's offices to make sure that when they're doing mutual aid, that they don't have reimbursement issues. We laid out money for fire departments to provide mutual aid when there were fires. Both of those things were things the division never did before. And so I just think overall, you've seen a dramatic shift in how we view our relationships with the local level. Obviously, all disasters are local, which is the moniker, except for, of course, COVID. That is definitely not all disasters are local. But I think the state has a role, and I think the attitude that we inherited around here was to push everything down to the locals, push it down, and in some instances even blame the locals. And I think Kevin and I understand that it is a symbiotic relationship. It is a partnership. We depend on you. You depend on us. If we do our job for you, that helps your response be more successful. If you do your job correctly, that makes us look good, and it becomes a well-coordinated effort. I mean, we've leaned forward way beyond what we used to do. I know Kevin has that as his thought process, which is, going out and getting those products, those logistics that we know you're going to need, those generators, those pumps, those light towers, getting them pre-staged rather than waiting for just orders to come in. So I just think that everything that you saw before COVID, everything you've seen during COVID, that whole mindset and thought process will be continued under Kevin's leadership.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you for the reimbursement process under the public assistance program. I know the division, at least with the prior administration, had concern with clawbacks, but it just seemed like they went too far in terms of making sure that every I was dotted and every T crossed. So we really appreciate what you've done on the PA side. Um, Director, I wanted to ask, I know you didn't get to accomplish everything you wanted when you came in January of 2019. Um, and I think maybe your expectations were a little bit different. Um, and then all of a sudden in 2020, we get hit by COVID. I wanted to just ask you what were your expectations coming in, and then what were they as you progressed through the year, and what did you kind of learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think my expectations coming in, for what I would say really was the first year of this job, I got pretty much what I expected. I mean, there were some things I learned here that I didn't know until I got here. Quite frankly, how poorly state employees were compensated. That's one of the things that I didn't understand until I got in here. One of the things that I'm proud to accomplish is I was able to get, we got $500,000 in my first budget year in raises, not merit based, but actual just straight up raises for people. State employees had their COLAs taken away from them. They've not gotten raises. We always like to say we should run government like a business. Well, in the compensation area, we definitely do not run government like a business. And so, those are one of the things that I learned. We were happy. I think I was the first director in a long time to be able to deliver on the promise of just across the board raises. So I think that's made a huge difference. I mean, obviously, no one's ever had a disaster that's gone on for over a year now. So I lost what we would say is blue sky time to try to make more systemic long-term changes for when we get out of blue skies. But quite frankly, I think the way we've responded to COVID and how we do operations and our capabilities. I mean, one of the things I wanted to accomplish when I came into the division is I wanted to raise the status of the Division of Emergency Management. I had felt that somehow the division just didn't have that status level. We weren't on the same playing field as some of our sister agencies, emergency managers, whether at the state level or at the county level. In my opinion, I felt were an afterthought when it came to just government, and I wanted to raise that stature. Now, I didn't know I would need a pandemic to help me do that, of course, but I do believe that one of the things that I'll leave here that will benefit Kevin, will benefit all the county EM directors, will benefit the division as a whole, is we have really raised the stature of this place. You now have the elected officials, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, the Governor's office, more engaged in the financing, the dollars of this division. We're talking about getting a new EOC. We're talking about creating a $1 billion emergency fund so that Kevin will be able to respond appropriately when we have disasters that are both federally funded and the disasters that are now not federally funded. There'll be money that we can access to help communities out. And so I think that for what I could bring to this job, I'm slightly different than I'm a little out of the mold of a usual emergency management director. So I think that the things that I was able to bring to this job, which was to integrate more with the political infrastructure here up in Tallahassee and put this division on their radar and why it's important. I mean, this is Florida. We were the disaster capital of the world before the pandemic. We're going to be the disaster capital of the world after the pandemic. This place needs the resources and the people to do that.
Director, a lot of people probably don't know this, but you were a former local elected official. I think you were probably one of the youngest city councilmen down in Parkland. And then you served 8 years in the House. I think a lot of us know about that. How did your local experience and working in the Florida legislature affect how you managed the division?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would draw upon is, most of the people in the legislature did not serve in local government. We know that, right? They have these grandiose ideas of what's wrong with local government. Of course, they've never served in local government, and so both Kevin and I are local government guys. Both Kevin and I have, I was in elected and Kevin was in staff, but we're both local government guys. And so I think Kevin and I have tried to look at, okay, when we're trying to come up with a policy or we're trying to work with a local, how do they see it? How do they look at it? Put our old hats on. What is their constraints on dollars and cents? Understanding, they got to get a deputy city manager or county manager or the county administrator to sign off on that. I think one of the things we did, quite frankly, is we started integrating a lot more with public works directors, understanding that there's a lot of places that don't have EM directors, and they rely on their public works department to help provide emergency services in their city, and so or their county. And so I think we've tried to just use our experience while we sit in these chairs to try to understand that we can do things up in Tallahassee, but how does it affect people on the ground? And again, going back to the policy of not pushing everything down and saying they got to do it on their own, the state helping. I mean, look, we get it, right? I mean, there are fiscal constraints down at the local levels, especially when you've been waiting on reimbursement for 2 or 3 storms. That's going to limit the appetite of a county administrator or a commission, quite frankly, to give the dollars that are needed to properly execute a response. And so Kevin and I understand a lot of that. I also appreciate how decisions get made at the local level. I remember sitting on the dais myself and interacting with the local your local residents. I mean, nobody is more in touch. Nobody has a better pulse. Nobody is more in tune with their community in elected office than a local elected official. We're not as accessible up here in Tallahassee as a state house member or a state senator, or in the governor's office. We're just not as accessible. But when you're the local commissioner or the mayor, you're running into your constituents at restaurants or in Publix, and they ask you questions, they send you emails, they expect a direct response. It's a different relationship than the folks up here, and so I think everything, quite frankly, Kevin and I have done has been impacted with our local government experience.
Kevin, I'd like to ask you a question because you're a veteran of emergency management, and I think there are pivotal moments that change how state and local and even federal emergency management operations occur. I think Hurricane Andrew was a big moment because it changed FEMA, and it certainly had a whole rewrite of 252 in Florida, including the EMPA surcharge that helps fund local government emergency management. I think 9/11 got us focused on terrorism, something that people had talked about but really hadn't planned for. And now we're sort of into this new era of COVID. Now, I know several years ago there was some training and planning and practicing of dealing with the pandemic, and I think it was H1N1. That was sort of the focus, and I don't think it caught a lot of the attention of perhaps elected officials. I think now we have their attention with COVID. So how do you see going forward some of the training in this world of emergency management and working with different agencies?
So Eric, you hit on the training. I'm going to also add exercise to that, right? So as a part of that planning, training, exercise cycle, when it comes to, a lot of people don't know this, especially a lot of the members that are on this call today, do not know that we actually do yearly mandatory 2 exercises. One is the hurricane exercise, or we're going to modify that a little bit this year to do something different. But it's a statewide exercise led from the emergency management side. But every year we must, to receive federal monies, your counties, and when I say your counties, your county health departments and your county emergency managers are required to exercise a pandemic. Those are in federal rule that comes down. So I don't know that a lot of elected officials, even the county administrators, know that. So to that point, there is exercises centered around it every year. And along with that exercise should come a gap analysis. What is it that we need more training on, right? Right now there's a bill that's moving through the House that says that we the division, are going to be required to carry PPE for 5 enumerated incidents: biological, chemical, radiological, nuclear, and pandemic. We're supposed to have that PPE on hand. That PPE on hand without doing training does nothing. So as a part of that, we're going to have to prepare and train for a potential pandemic in the future. The one thing that I would say, just as a former local guy at the assistant county administrator level, at the emergency management director level, is, I hope that this doesn't do what we had happen after Hurricane Andrew, after what we had with 9/11, and that was we had the spike in funding, and then we have, as we just had the DSOC meeting yesterday, the state Homeland Security grant program used to be in the $100 million range. It's down to less than $9 million now. And how do you respond, sustain capabilities when you go from 100 million down to just 10% of what was left back in 2003? So those are some challenges we're going to have as it relates to that. But we are going to do training. We are required to do exercises every year.
Are those exercises, are they more like just small tabletop exercises at the county level, or is it more like hurricane exercise that you do every year that I guess potentially could have full activation at the local level?
Right. So most counties participate in what's referred to as the multi-year training and exercise planning workshop, the MyTEP. And usually what happens is you'll have a year of tabletops followed by a year of, if you will, drills or not full-scale exercises, but you'll have a little more complex exercises in year 2, followed by year 3. You'll have that full scale where you actually set up some type of pandemic drive-through pod or something like that. One of the most significant ones that happens in our state on an annual, I should say on an annual basis, but on a routine basis, is Disney's Reedy Creek pod that is done at Disney. Orange County will work with that group, or it's either Orange or Osceola works with Disney to actually do flu vaccines and use the flu vaccine as if it was in this case, COVID vaccine. And they do that full-scale exercise once every 3 years at a minimum and actually push people through that. I think more people need to invest like that, especially with their local CHD. I think the one thing, and I don't want to put words in the director's mouth, but certainly one thing that I've seen both at the county level and now at the state level is we either have really good relationships with the CHDs and the local EM director, or we have no relationship at all. And there is no medium there. It is one extent or the other. You've got to have those relationships to do what we're talking about right here in that training and exercise vein. Those relationships have got to be repaired. They got to be worked out. They got to happen.
A lot of turnover.
A lot of turnover too. There's a lot of turnover there at that level, especially at the county CHD level. There's a little more stability on the EM side, but there's definitely turnover on the CHD. But that's where you got to have the county EM director, the county administrator, reach out to that local health department director and forge those relationships.
So a question for both of you. You said we have a requirement to do exercises. There's plans in place. So what over the course of the year, and I know there's probably a bunch of them, but what are some of the more high-level pivots that you had to make that weren't really anticipated in some of the plans and exercises that we have done over the past couple of years?
Well, I mean, I'll just give you the biggest pivot, quite frankly, is, when it came to PPE and then testing supplies, I think the biggest pivot we had to make was, well, what happens if there is nothing? What if there is no supplies? What if the entire national supply chain dries up? What if the international supply chain doesn't come to this country? What if, the fact that everything really that we needed in the beginning of this, which was PPE and swabs and test kits and sample collection kits, what if all of that was not made in this country anymore and we couldn't get it here? And how could we handle that? And so I think that for me, between the March of 2020 and now, I mean that's been the largest, I think, hourly pivot that we were making. I mean, look, we chased that stuff more aggressively than any other state. I think we did quite fine. We've built a huge PPE reserve now. We've distributed over 80 million masks. We have 20 million masks on reserve. 10 million gowns, over 10 million gloves in reserve. We went from 1 warehouse to 4 warehouses of stuff. And so, but I think the largest challenge, the thing that we didn't exercise or didn't think to exercise. And quite frankly, even exercising it, I don't know if we go back what that would have done. I mean, if the national supply chain dries up, Kevin and I can't start sewing masks from, available cotton that we get. But that clearly was the largest challenge. It was the most difficult period, at least for me in this response, trying to get doctors and nurses, heroes on the front lines, life-saving equipment, and not being able to get it to them fast enough. Again, I think we did better than most of all the other states, because we literally worked that 24 hours a day. This place didn't close. We had a team of people locked in a room searching for this stuff, put eggs in every basket, bought it from wherever we could, didn't care about price because we didn't want to put a price on somebody's life. But, that's something that we're going to have to grapple with, not just as a state, but as a country, which is why we've created these reserves, which is if there's some other emergency in the future and there's some sort of life-saving thing that we need and we can't get it, that's a tough thing to deal with.
I think, and I'm going to use what the director set up there to talk about the biggest challenge that I've faced running the operation here is, and I think this is going to be a challenge for us in the next decade of emergency management, and not just emergency management. Again, I'll go back to being an assistant county administrator, the individuals that are on this phone, and that is the challenge of this Amazon world that we live in, where I can pick it up and tomorrow it's delivered. The mentality, how do we, and again, this is open to anyone. If you come up with the answer, I'd love to have it. But how do we manage the expectation of individuals in large-scale disasters in the future of responding, going today and it being fixed tomorrow? If you go to Panama City, those debris piles that were 30 feet high did not leave there overnight. They didn't leave there over a month or a couple of months. And we're going to have the challenge as we continue to live in a society that is immediate, instant gratification. How do we as government officials, both state and local, manage the expectation of the individuals? Because if Prime can get it to me like that, why can't the government get the debris off the side of the road? And that's going to be, we've had discussions ad nauseum about
that
this,
was the big deal. That was the huge deal during Irma, quite frankly.
Right.
And I'll take that comment and dovetail into something else, because one of the things we got to think about is how will COVID, the post-COVID, how will we be affected? I definitely think what Kevin is talking about is people expecting things to be so instant because how technology has changed their everyday life. As Kevin said, you can order something and it shows up the next day. But look, this was the most political disaster of our time. So it used to be that when these disasters happened, we came together as a society. It was people helping people. If we get, if Kevin gets a Category 3 storm, this year, hopefully that doesn't happen. But if Kevin gets a real storm this summer, is there going to be some sort of effect where we just don't see that rallying around each other anymore? We're more split. Things are more political. Kevin or the governor start to be criticized on day one by, the political opponents of this administration or a next administration from the opposite party. Do we start bickering with each other earlier rather than supporting each other? I'm hopeful that doesn't happen. It's a huge concern of mine. Quite frankly, and for local elected officials, it's no different in that their residents putting pressure on them to do stuff that's just impossible in a day or two after an event, because they are used to obviously things happening quicker in their life and expecting their local government being able to deliver that. The other quick thing, quite frankly, in addition to that, Kevin, is the emergency management department here, the divisions in all of your counties, everyone's burnt out, right? Everyone is exhausted. I'd like to say that I'm leaving and giving Kevin a fresh team. We're still in COVID and he's entering a hurricane season. And so that's not just up here, that's down to the local level also. I could even make an argument that quite frankly, the local level people are even more tired. Just because they're closer to the day-to-day action. And so, that's just another concern of mine in the intermediate, is that, are things even maybe going to go even slower because, just the industry is burnt out. How about, not just the people working, how about all the vendors, that everybody, depends on, local vendors, state vendors, whatever it is. how are those vendors going to respond quickly when they're already stretched so thin responding to COVID? So I think those are a lot of potential future challenges.
Well, I want to respect y'all's time, and I know those masks get hot after a while, and no one likes to talk in them. But I just
No,
wanted
this
to
is good. This is the only time I get to dress up as a stormtrooper.
That's awesome. Um, Kevin and Director Moskowitz, normally after a hurricane, there is typically a hot wash and some post-disaster recommendations. After Hurricane Andrew, of course, there was the Lewis Commission report that had about 100 recommendations that had to be implemented. We're still ongoing right now in the pandemic. I'm sure your planning team is sort of tracking a lot of this stuff, and are they going to issue any sort of interim recommendations or interim observations before, I would assume, somewhere down the road you have a final report for everybody to look at?
Well, I'll take that to start with. So Ryan Locke, many of you guys know Ryan Locke by name. You may not know his face, but Ryan Locke is our plans chief. He is also our Blue Sky Preparedness Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan unit lead. He has been, since the beginning, he's been taking after action items. Right after we did the big PPE push, we actually had some interns that we sent around and took some notes on what were things that we needed to take and copy for the after action report. After we got through the bulk of testing, and getting that PPE in and get it distributed, and we were doing testing, again, we got some feedback. When we had the big push for nurses over the summer and we had the spike, right after that in September, we captured data. As we went through hurricane and we had Ada and Sally and one other that I can't remember that, how did the co-response, go into two different responses and managing that, again, capturing that data, we got it. Now that we're coming into in midstream of the vaccination process, we're still capturing that data. One of the things I want to reassure everybody that we've done is we've implemented everything that needed to be done for co-response planning or COVID-19 sheltering into COVID for FY 2021. We've got those recommendations and we've already scheduled to implement those practices, right? So again, that's why we have a reserve cache of PPE that is in the tens of millions, so that we can make sure we take care of that. So we have been capturing that all along. Eventually, to your point, Eric, there will be an after action report, right? That'll encompass everything. But we have been capturing data all along and not waiting to the end of this thing to implement best practices or the corrective action plan, as some might know it as. We've been implementing corrective action plan as a part of a cyclical process here. As soon as we find something that's broken, Ryan and his team, future ops planning, response. We still got Lennon McQuarter and the Preparedness Bureau that's chugging along and everything on Blue Skies. They're implementing that stuff behind the scenes, behind the curtain, so that we're ready to go for the next season or the next dual response that we have.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there'll be lots of things to look at and address and fix, because obviously there's a lot of learning lessons from the last year. I mean, one of the things we tried to do since day one, and I think it had a dramatic effect on how we responded to COVID, is just to remove the bureaucracy, really to increase speed. We're a small agency. If we can't respond fast, then we're as guilty as our larger agencies that are mired in bureaucracy. I mean, we're 270 people here. And so, we got to be able to go fast. And that doesn't mean that you don't have checks and balances to make sure that money isn't spent incorrectly. But it does mean that you got to be able to move, and whether that's putting in pre-positioned contracts or changing the way we do finance around here. I mean, we did lots of things new and differently for the first time. Some of them worked and will be repeated. Some of them did not work and they'll be eliminated. I think probably to Kevin's chagrin, while we'll do a hot wash, I mean, quite frankly, I think we do a hot wash here every single day, because I am constantly tinkering and changing and maneuvering and a new idea. Okay, that worked, expand it. Okay, that one was bad, get rid of it. I mean, we're constantly looking at everything we do. I mean, I analyze this place every day, and I may wear people out, but the whole point is that there is nothing here that is stagnant or just moving along. We are not just chugging along on autopilot here. We are constantly doing things, and quite frankly, I think Kevin and I, over the last year, if you compare us to a lot of other EM departments, A lot of the ideas that you've seen out there, the governor has announced, or that you've seen us doing from day one, has come out of the Division of Emergency Management. Whether that was, starting from, a mobile testing unit, to getting test kits that other states couldn't get on the market, to rapid testing at all of our sites, something other states struggled with dramatically, to mobile vaccination buses and walk-up sites at vaccination now rather than appointments. The church missions that we've been doing with vaccines, the home-to-home program, knocking on people's door, the homebound vaccination program, and I could go on and on. I mean, all of that has come out of the division, and so we're constantly we're not stuck, in my opinion, as just trying to move paper from the left to the right just to get through the day. I mean, we are constantly changing the program here day to day to try to make stuff work. And so, again, I think that'll be a hangover as we get into hurricane season and now look at how we do hurricanes. Sure, there's some tried and true things that we'll always continue to do, but I think there's a lot of experience and now new ways to look at things that will apply to hurricane response.
Well, again, I want to close this out and respect your time. I thank you guys for coming on today. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say you guys have been doing yeoman's work for the past year. It's been unbelievable. Davin and I were down there initially at the beginning of this, and we just felt like, hey, it might be better just to communicate with you remotely. And Kevin, I know we bugged the heck out of you on a lot of different issues, but you've always been very responsive to us, and we appreciate that. Director Moskowitz, we wish you all the best in your next endeavor, and I'm sure your family misses you. And I'm glad to know that as a dad and a parent that you get to go back and spend time with your family down in South Florida. So thanks for all the work you've done. And Kevin, we look forward to working with you in the good and the bad times as we come into hurricane season. So thank you both, gentlemen, for coming on.